Good afternoon. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News, coming to you from our digital desk. We're going to be taking you live into the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. Really kind of an interesting sentencing here. Neil Miller is from Richfield. He was in Maple Heights when police got a call that there was a man slumped over the steering wheel of his SUV. When police showed up, they reached in, turned off the car from the passenger side, or then went around to the passenger side. The officer then noticed that Neil Miller started the car back up, and as the officer reached in to try and stop or turn off the ignition again, Miller put it in drive and took off. That action is technically kidnapping, abduction of that officer. He was found guilty, convicted of abduction and attempted fail to comply. He did a short time later stop, let the officer out, and then continue on his chase. Let's take you live now to the sentencing.
I do think that there are statements in the offense summary that I don't agree with, but I'm happy to proceed to sentencing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'll hear from the state first, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Judge, obviously I was not the prosecutor assigned to this case, but I am the supervisor in charge of this region. So the first thing I should note, Judge, is our victim is not here. I did contact officer, and I'm going to spell it for you because I'm going to mispronounce it. It's Mijangos, M-I-J-A-N-G-O-S, from Maple Heights Police Department. I spoke with him and talked to him, see if he wanted to show up at the sentencing. He did not wish to appear, Judge, which was surprising to me, but he was remarkably, I don't want to say, the way he's handling this case, given the facts of this case, Judge, he could have been a lot madder than he is. This is the craziest case I've seen in a long time. I don't know if you know a whole lot about it, Judge. But the Maple Heights Police Department on January 7th of this year responded to a motorist who has been passed out basically behind the wheel. When they approach the vehicle, long story short, the officer turns off the car. It's the defendant in the driver's seat. And I was watching the body cams, and you can see the officer speaking with the defendant through the passenger side. The door's open, and he's leaning in. At some point, the defendant turns the car on, throws it in drive. There's a struggle with the officer to stop it. And now the defendant's taking off. The officer has a choice to either jump out and risk getting run over or get in the car. The officer got in the car. So then for about 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes, you have the defendant driving the car with his hand on the gear shift, because it's an old car, so the gear shift's up here. And you have the officer sitting next to him, trying to convince him to stop. And the defendant won't. The officer threatens him, I'm going to have to shoot you if you don't stop. He won't do it. He said, well, then I'll just crash the car. The officer waits for an appropriate time to bail out. There's a side street where it slows down quick enough you can see on the body cam and bailing out. And the defendant then takes off. He eventually ends up comes back to someone's house in the mud. But it's just a remarkable case, Judge. And the officer showed incredible restraint. There were officers around the car. Judge, you know and I know, and we've been doing this long enough to know how some of these cases turn out. And this officer chose restraint that day, and I think the defendant should be happy about that. That said, Judge, even speaking with the officer, he's not asking for the rest of this man's life in prison, Judge, but he thinks some type of jail sentence, prison sentence should be ordered in this case. I know the defendant tried to go the drug treatment route, and Judge, if you look at his history, he's had probation shots, and he's failed it. He's gone to prison, I think, on an F5, which is hard to do in today's society. He went to prison on an F5, if I read that correctly, which means he's given ample opportunity to show that he can do probation. He can't. So, Judge, I would leave it to your discretion. I have thoughts on my mark in this case, Judge. I wish I would have done a deeper dive, but I'll leave it there. But it is what it is, Judge. No time has to be consecutive, but we're leaving it to your court. But I think a short prison sentence in this case is appropriate, given his history and given the facts of this case, Judge. It's just you don't see it in cases like this. That the body cams are remarkable. Those two just sitting in the car, just riding the cops trying to convince them to stop.
I haven't seen that video.
I mean, I could certainly tee it up if you want me to play it. I'd have to play it from my laptop, Judge, because obviously I was not ready for this. But if you would like, I could come up the sidebar and we could play the body cam.
Okay. Let me hear from the defense attorney first, please. Mr. Oleski, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor, and may it please the court. The first thing I note is I think my plea agreement with the state is that the state was not going to recommend any sentence here today. So that's my first thing I would note. It is true that the facts of this case are relatively extraordinary, and we are thankful to the Maple Heights Police Department that they did not exercise any physical force on Mr. Miller other than to arrest him. And certainly the officer did show, who was in the car with Mr. Miller, showed remarkable restraint in not doing anything further to Mr. Miller. As the prosecutor indicated, the police officers responded to the scene sometime shortly after 9 a.m. Mr. Miller is asleep in his car on the side of the street. The car is running. One of the officers opens the passenger door, reaches in to turn off the ignition, turns off the ignition, and then engages Mr. Miller for about a minute and a half to 2 minutes, asking Mr. Miller if he knows where he is, what he's doing there, etc. It's fairly obvious when you review the body cam footage that Mr. Miller is disoriented. He's not somewhat incoherent. And you can see that he becomes agitated and startled. And so he reaches to turn the ignition. The officer reaches in the vehicle to try to stop Mr. Miller. It's unsuccessful. Mr. Miller turns the ignition. The officer then is in the vehicle for about two and a half minutes or so, as Mr. Miller is driving dangerously, no doubt. Mr. Miller does stop the vehicle, and the officer thankfully safely exited the vehicle. I want to turn a little bit to the history and characteristics of Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, as the court can see with the PSI, has a fairly lengthy criminal history. For the most part, these are not serious offenses, other than the one that he's here on today. As the prosecutor indicated, he has gone to prison. He has received probationary sentences. And I would submit to Your Honor that a custodial sentence is not appropriate here and would not fit with the purposes of felony sentencing. Mr. Miller is someone who needs treatment, not incarceration. The one thing I think that is consistent when you review Mr. Miller's background is he has never had a sustained treatment program. As Your Honor probably will see when you review body cam footage, he's disoriented. He's under the influence of some substance. And that is oftentimes what has led him to commit criminal offenses. And Mr. Miller has struggled with addiction for most of his adult life. Again, just reading the PSI, you can see that he began using drugs as early as age 16, I believe. And Mr. Miller has never had a sustained period where he's been ordered, because I think that's what he needs. I've dealt with Mr. Miller now for the last 3 or 4 months, since I mentioned my appearance on this case. Mr. Miller has been remarkably cooperative with me. He has appeared at every court appearance that I've attended with him. He's been on time and he's been communicative. But the one thing that he needs is he needs the proverbial kick in the butt to turn his life around. He needs rehabilitation. He needs a sustained treatment plan. He does not need to go to prison. He's gone to prison, and that hasn't worked. And I know I'm making a big ask here, Your Honor, but I think that is the most appropriate punishment here, is to ensure, and that fits with the purposes that the court is required to follow under the General Assembly's sentencing statutes. Mr. Miller is employed. He's been employed for the last 5 years. He lives with his mother, who's here in the courtroom with us. And I think his mother would say the same things I'm telling you, Your Honor, that he needs treatment. He needs in order to go to a treatment plan and turn his life around. And as Your Honor knows, if he does not follow those orders, we're hearing a probation violation, and Your Honor can impose a custodial sentence. And I'm urging the court to do that here today, because I think that is what is appropriate. I'm respect what the officer, the victim of this offense, has indicated to this prosecutor. And I'm, again, appreciative that the officer is not as upset and angry as I would be if I were the officer that was involved in this offense. But I think that shows what's appropriate here. What's appropriate here, which is a non-custodial sentence with in order that Mr. Miller would go with intensive drug treatment plan. As Your Honor knows, that was one of the options that we were considering as we pre-tried this case, was in referral to the drug court. When he got very far along in that process, and then ultimately that fell through. So with that, Your Honor, I'd ask the court to impose a non-custodial sentence and in order that he go to intensive treatment plan. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Mr. Clary, you
Copy that video for the court to review, or a portion of it.
Judge, I can play it for you. I don't have a thumb drive to copy it really quickly, but I can play it for you if you want my laptop. And I can show defense counsel prior to it. Or I can quickly send a text and see if someone can bring me up a thumb drive.
I'd like to see it on the screen if you can do it.
Okay. Can we take a 2-minute
That's
recess?
fine. Yeah, we'll go off the record for a minute.
You will grab a thumb drive.
How are you? I'm good, how are you? Remember you from TV. I don't remember your name.
Dan DeRose with 19 News here. We're going to have a little bit of a delay. The judge wants to see the actual body cam of the incident in question where they tried to take Neil Miller into custody. He puts the vehicle in drive and ends up having a police officer in his passenger seat for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. You heard his own attorney say that he was under some sort of substance at the time and that he has had an addiction problem throughout most of his life, and that he comes to and wasn't sure what was going on. That's why, and there's Mr. Miller himself. The judge has walked off the bench, so this might be a little bit of a couple-minute delay, more than just 2 minutes, according to the prosecuting attorney. This is really something that, and I did hear the prosecuting attorney say he was filling in on this case. That would be something that you would expect them to have, so that the judge can see for himself this level of fear. You had an officer had to make a decision. He's in the passenger seat, tries to reach in and get the keys out of the ignition. That's when Miller puts it in gear and starts driving. We heard from the prosecutor that the officer had a decision at that point. Does he bail out and run the risk of getting run over by the back tires, or does he stay in the vehicle? He stays in. Apparently there's a heated conversation, let me out or I'm going to have to shoot you. That clearly didn't happen, but after about 2 minutes, Miller does stop the vehicle. The officer was able to get out without being hurt. Again, another surprise. The officer in question, the quote-unquote victim here, he decided not to appear in court. Normally, we get victim impact statements, meaning the officer who was abducted for that short time, that he should be able to give his opinion. He chose not to show up in court, and you heard the prosecutor say he was surprised that officer from Maple Heights was not more upset, was not more mad at what had happened that day. So we'll wait here because this video is obviously going to be fairly intriguing. It's not often an officer gets into the car of a suspect that's on a chase and then has a conversation with that suspect saying, I'm going to have to shoot you if you don't let me out, and then eventually does get out of that vehicle unharmed. So we will wait for this delay. We'll keep listening in the court here. Prosecutor had to head somewhere to get a thumb drive that he'll be able to hook up on the screen. The judge could have watched it on the prosecutor's laptop. I'm not sure why the judge said no, he needed to see it on the screen instead of watching it on the prosecutor's laptop. The judge is clearly back in the courtroom, and we'll see if we get back underway. I'm not sure that I've seen the prosecutor come back with the thumbnail.
for us to also get a copy of that.
Yeah, it's hard.
Of the actual body cam video. It will be interesting to see from the standpoint that you have to remember officers were called to the scene in the first place there in Maple Heights because a man was slumped over the wheel in an SUV. So from that standpoint, we'll be able to see just how out of it Neil Miller was. His own attorney has already admitted that he was under the influence of something. He did not clarify exactly what that was, but that he was under the influence. He claims you'll even see Mr. Miller get startled when he comes to, and the officer is reaching in from the passenger side. He's opened the door and reaching in, and that's when he decided to start the vehicle and put it in gear. So we will see from that perspective just how out of it Neil Miller is. And then just this conversation, was this a panicked, screaming, yelling conversation from the officer saying to stop the vehicle or I'm going to have to shoot you? That's what the prosecutor said. We will hear, so we will wait on this for the time being. Again, if you're just joining us, this is an interesting sentence. So you even heard the prosecutor say this is one of the craziest cases he's worked on in a while. You have police called to a scene where the suspect and now the defendant, the man on the left side of your screen, Neil Miller, was clearly out of it behind the wheel of an SUV. The officer, from the accounts that we had gotten from Maple Heights Police, that he was able to reach in and stop or turn off the SUV and then open the front passenger door. Open up the front passenger door to turn off the SUV to try and take the keys out, and that's when Miller comes to, starts up the vehicle and puts it in gear. The officer then, according to the state, had to make a decision. Do I bail? Do I jump out while he's driving and potentially fall and get run over by the back tires of the SUV? Or do I stick? And he stayed inside that vehicle as Miller then took police on another chase. At the first chase, he then stops 2 minutes in. He lets the officer get out, but then continues to lead police on a chase until he gets to someone's home. You heard the state say that they think a short prison sentence is appropriate, but his own defense is saying that he has never gone to a long-term treatment facility and that they are hoping the judge will perhaps sentence him to some sort of treatment rehab program instead of sentencing him to prison. But so for Neil Miller, what was already going to be a long day in court, it has been extended as we wait for the prosecutor to come up with a thumb drive, or at least some sort of media drive, to be able to show the judge the actual body cam video. So we'll just stick with this for the time being as we hope the prosecutor can get that thumb drive back relatively quickly. We will reset here. Dan DeRosa with Channel 19. If you're just joining us, if you're watching us on social media and came across this video, we're waiting for that man, Neil Miller, to be sentenced. He's from Richfield. He was in Maple Heights. This is back in January 7th of this year. He was in an SUV. Someone called police and said, and as we see there is the prosecutor perhaps going to download. Looks like he's got a couple of different methods there. Someone calls police and says a man is slumped over the steering wheel of a vehicle, and when police arrive to check on him, they find Miller there pretty much out of it. And when they reach in to stop the vehicle and then go around to the passenger side, an officer goes to open up the door and is going to reach in and grab the keys. That's when Miller comes to, starts the vehicle and takes off. The officer then sits in the vehicle as opposed to bailing out and going to be on a spill there, and has a conversation with Miller from what was reported to be a minute or two about let me out of the car or I'll have to shoot you. He does eventually stop, lets the officer out of the car, and then continues on the chase. Looks like the prosecutor has got it fairly quickly. Congrats to him on navigating the technology. And let's listen in now, as it looks like we'll get a look at the video.
Please, yeah, we're back on the record.
Judge, sorry. So, Judge, I have now placed what I will call as the state sentencing exhibit number 1. I have a disc that I'll burn it to for the courts, for the court record.
Thank you.
Okay, Judge, just for the record, as you know, that the first 30 seconds are muted, but this is, you can see the date, 1/7/24, 9/16/29 now on the record. This is the body camera worn by the responding officer.
Hey, police, move, police. What are you doing, dude? What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay. And, I mean, you're just here in the middle of the street, man. You live over here?
Yes.
Where do you live at? Come on, man, let me ask you how, dude. You understand what I'm saying. I speak English, you speak English.
Yes.
What's going on? Do you live over here?
Yes.
Where you live at?
I live in Richfield, but drop off my friend here.
What house?
We're here.
What's the address? Do you know it?
1224.
All right, so why are you sleeping there? Didn't feel like driving home or what?
So glad.
Okay. Let me identify you out here, all right? What's your buddy's name?
Her name's Sam.
Sam? You dropped him off what time?
Her.
What time you drop her off
10:15 minutes ago.
at? Okay. You know what time it is?
Yeah.
He says regularly guessing 10, 15 minutes ago? Give me your ID and see you get him out of here, all right? I had my partner guys here. Hey. Don't hit. Don't hit.
stopped it at 3 minutes, 31 seconds. As you can see, the officer had bailed out of the car by then. So, Judge, that's basically, they continue to chase him. It's on a different camera, but that's the pertinent part to this case. Judge, one thing I would like to correct, obviously I was not the prosecutor that took the plea, so anything that was talked about on the record, I'll stick by that. Just please, okay, so if it wasn't promised, then that's it. Judge, I just want to let you know what the officer said, and I agree with him that this is more than just a probationary case.
Thank you. For the record, certainly I was here for the change of plea, and there was no promise to a particular sentence, so I'll just note that. Mr. Lesky, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, Judge, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Miller, before the court announces sentence this afternoon, you have the right to speak. You don't have to. It's up to you.
Your Honor, I recognize there was something wrong that day, and I deeply apologize to the officer. I deeply apologize to the other officers involved in that. I'm just asking for a chance to change my life around. Like I said, I recognize what I've done wrong here today, and it's all, if I have mercy of the court.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Mr. Miller, the court has reviewed your pre-sentence investigation in its entirety. Court notes that your prior criminal history goes back to, I believe it was 2006. You have numerous drug offenses, open container, OVI, disorderly conduct. You have what looked like a second OVI or physical control in 2019. Noise violations, theft, receiving stolen property, possessing criminal tools, aggravated possession of drugs. You're convicted of, appears to be numerous felonies associated with drug offenses. Low-level felonies, but felonies nonetheless. You have a theft by deception charge. That was from a couple of years ago. An additional theft case. I will note these seem like they're all over the place. Lake County, Medina, different municipalities. One thing that concerns me, and I'll ask Mr. Miller that you not comment on this, but since I've seen you since the change of plea, it appears you've been indicted with a new drug case, which is now a pending felony down in Summit County Common Pleas Court, which is very concerning for me. That while out on bond, you commit a new offense, or at least being accused of one. That's very worrisome for me. I do agree with some of the things your attorney has said, that you need what he described as a proverbial kick in the butt. But as to whether there was a question on whether he needs a custodial sentence, respectfully to you, counsel, this is what is an abduction of a police officer and an ensuing police chase that went with it. And the prosecutor never indicated anything differently. Your client did plead guilty to that abduction charge, and now that I see the video, I see why he pled guilty to it to begin with. I mean, that is a frightening video. That is not a ride I would want to be in, and I can't imagine what Officer Mijangos, spelled Mijangos, the victim on this case, the police officer from Maple Heights, was going through at that time. I'm sure he's certainly not paid enough or has any sort of patience for what happened with this. I'm thankful that he wasn't injured at all. Mr. Clary, is that your understanding?
That's exactly right, Judge.
Brutal. That is one frightening car ride, and I can't believe, having seen that video, that nobody was hurt. But again, we are here for sentencing on what effectively is abduction of a police officer with an ensuing police chase. I realize that drug treatment is something that needs to be taken seriously, and I hope you address that, and I believe there's programming available for you, Mr. Miller. But the fact is, you have gone to prison before. You have many cases that go back for a couple of decades, albeit low-level felonies and misdemeanors, and you definitely need that kick in the butt that your attorney was asking for, but in a different way. The court does believe a custodial sentence is warranted in this case. I should note, prior to coming on the bench, I did have the opportunity to review the entire case file, the pre-sentence investigation report. Courts considered the statements made by counsel today, as well as that of Mr. Miller. Courts considered RC 2929.11 for the principles and purposes of sentencing, RC 2929.12 for the seriousness of recidivism factors, RC 2929.13, and other RC sections for felony sentencing, and RC 2929.21 for misdemeanor sentencing. Mr. Miller, you will be going to prison today. The court believes that giving you or sentencing you to something in the alternative would send a chilling message to the safety of this community. And I have concerns about this video I just saw. Your sentence on count 1, which is amended to abduction, will be as follows. Court will sentence you to 18 months in prison on count 1. You will be given credit for 36 jail days. On count 3, which is attempted failure to comply with an order to signal a police officer, court sentences you to 12 months on that count. Your 12 months on count 3 to be served concurrent to count 1 for a grand total of 18 months in prison. Court expects you to behave while you're in the institution. We get those periodic summaries from the institution which tell us if there have been any new infractions. And that's important that you take advantage of the time while you're in there. Do I think you need drug treatment? Absolutely. But in this case, a prison sentence is appropriate. Court does find Mr. Oleski, is your client indigent at this time?
He is.
Thank you. Are you working presently, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay. As you are being incarcerated today, the court will make a finding of indigency and waive court costs, fees, and fines against you. You are expected again to behave while you're in the institution. I will advise you about post-release control. As you are being sent to the institution today, the parole board will monitor you after release from prison for a mandatory minimum of 1 year up to a maximum of 3 years. If you're so inclined, you can apply for judicial release at a later date. The prosecutor, as well as the victim from the Maple Heights Police Department, will have involvement with that process. Anything else from the lawyers today?
No, Judge, thanks.
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. This defendant is remanded. We're off the record.
Dan DeRose with 19 News. As you see Neil Miller heading off to prison today, that was not the outcome he was obviously hoping for. According to his own defense attorney, they were hoping for some sort of outpatient or maybe even an inpatient treatment program. But as the judge saw that video, and you saw it if you were watching live, that was a frightening car ride for that officer who was simply trying to jump in and turn off the SUV. But then Miller takes off at an extremely high-rated speed, and you could see the trees flying by, and he finally slows down enough that that officer can get out of the car. 1.5 years in prison for Neil Miller. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be right here on our digital properties live. Otherwise, look for 3.5 hours of news and weather to start at 3 o'clock on Channel 19. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News. Have a good afternoon.
19 News is everywhere.